In this video, I'll explore how to create an interactive drop menu inside of Figma. I've been working on this demo called Veg Out for a vegetarian delivery service, and I envisioned that the recipes menu item here would actually drop down to reveal different recipe choices for breakfast, lunch, dinner, desserts, and that kind of thing. I want to keep my main menu here uncluttered and allow different options to unfold on demand when the user rolls over and makes a choice. So let's explore how we might design and prototype an interactive drop menu. I'll do this by creating a drop menu component that will be self-contained and reveal the drop menu. And before I actually create the component, I want to make sure that I design all the elements that are going to be a part of it. I want to know what it's going to look like before I get into the interactivity and the prototyping. And so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start here by duplicating this background header here, that yellow bar, and I'm going to turn that really into the drop menu area. I'll use that same color so that it sort of connects with the content that's here. I do want it to go above other content, so perhaps I need to move that up, and I could drag that rectangle more towards the top, for example, of where I need this to be, so it's on top of other content. And depending on how big this might be, I could adjust the size of it or specify its size and height here. So I might specify a width of 200, for example, and a height of 140 or something like that. I think I'll round the corners of this off, and so I'm going to go to my independent corners and take the corners that are on the bottom here and round them off to 2020, so that the bottom corner here rounds off, and it's kind of going to drop down and have that sort of rounded look to the corners. All right, so that's what I'm going to use for my menu. And then I do want some text to be in that menu as well, and maybe a couple other components. So I'm thinking that when I roll over recipes here, I might actually have a little bar that goes underneath it, just a little separator. And I'll use some colors from my library that I've already defined for that. So I've got this sort of light green that might be there, and I'm going to actually scale this to about the same size as the word recipes. It might be kind of right in between where my drop menu starts and where the word recipes sort of begins, and I can position that. I think I'd like that, and then I do want to have sort of recipes, that same text style come down for my menu items. So I'm going to bring that down here, and I do want that sort of on top of everything else. And I'm going to have one of these options be for breakfast, one for lunch, and one for dinner at least. I want at least 3 different menu drop items. So I could duplicate this. So if I make a duplicate of this and I bring that down, once I get kind of the spacing I like, if I used Control D the next time, it would make another duplicate with even spacing. And I like that feature in Figma, that once you've made sort of one copy, the next duplicate would sort of understand the spacing that you want and just add that in. So this is kind of what I want this to look like. I think maybe that this content probably should be a little bit more indented a bit so that it's not right. It might not align as well with the with recipes, or either that, or I could take the box and kind of have it drop where these are more centered on the drop. Maybe I do more of a centered drop menu, and then make sure that these are centered items, aligning, for example, where the text would align to the center as I change things. So I need to figure out what the exact sort of look I'm going for might be, and I think maybe I like the centered look a little bit better. Before I actually sort of type this text in, I'm realizing that when I roll over the text, I do want it to change color. So I'm thinking what might be useful is to create some interactive components of the text itself. And then I could reuse that component within the drop menu. So before I proceed any further, I'm going to go ahead and select the recipes, and I'm going to turn that into a component. So that element here is going to be a component. I can see that it's a component because we've got the four diamonds here, and right there we can see that it's now a component, and from there I could add some variants to that component. I really just wanted one rollover variant. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the rollover here, and it's going to make a second version of this. And that version, I do want to lighten up and change colors. So I'm going to change the color for that. And the color that I want for it here is going to be the lighter green. And so I've now got this sort of recipes kind of component element that's there. And what I might do is just move this off outside of the scene so I can kind of see what's happening with it, and then I'm going to use an instance of that component when we come back, but this is going to be the basis for our text. And I know that I want my prototype here to have some rollover interactivity, so I'm going to actually go into the component itself, go to the prototyping mode, and say that I want to shift from this darker version to the lighter version. I am going to do that while hovering over it. So I'm going to choose, instead of on click, I'll choose on hover. And then what we're going to do is change the property from the default to the variant that I had. It's probably a good idea to name the variants that are there. If I was back into the design mode here, I could certainly change the property name from variant 2 to like the on state or the rollover state or something like that with these. And I could take the original and call it the normal state, but I'm just going to leave it default for now. And then we'll go back to our prototype and make sure that in the interaction that's there, as defined by this hover, we're moving from, while hovering, we're going to change that to the rollover state. And I do want that to smart animate, where it's going to be a little bit snappy. I might even just have it happen in only 200 milliseconds, where it's going to just animate to a lighter green. So that will be the rollover effect that's on there. If I want to see how that might work, I could always go from my assets now and pull an instance of that and pull that back out and kind of align it onto my, into my frame here. And then I could position that into place as to where I wanted that inside the scheme. If we look at this frame and we go into the prototype of it now, and take a look, and I could hit Shift Spacebar in order to get a quick preview. When I roll over that, it's going to lighten up. You can kind of see that it's this sort of lighten up rollover effect. And or I could preview it a little bit larger in order to make sure it sort of looks the way that I want it to. And in previewing it, it looks like I've got a slight misalignment here of where the drop menu is going to go, but I do see that that rollover is working and it's changing color for me. So that's what I wanted for that particular element. All right, I want to zoom in on this content just a little bit more so I can see that. I'm going to hit Control Plus, and I want to make sure, for example, that this element is, going underneath or connecting with so that there's no gap there between one and the other of these. Okay. And so now that I've got this as a component, what I'm going to do is make some duplicates of that component. And I could bring those down into my group here, and there'll be another instance of that text button component or that text list component, which is only called recipes here. And so that's fine for now. I could have renamed that, but I'm going to make a duplicate of that and then Control D for another duplicate so that these are spaced evenly to show what that's going to look like. And then what I want to do is do an override on what the text is. So this one is going to be called breakfast. And so I'll type in breakfast, and I'd had in the design here, I have this aligning to the center so that this will align as I want. This one is going to be called lunch, and that last one on the override is going to be called dinner. And so we've got 3 different versions here of those instances, and in my layers I can see that each of those versions are here. They're still labeled with the name recipes here, but this is the breakfast one, the lunch one, and the dinner one, and I could rename them as well so I know where they are. I get a little lazy sometimes in naming my layers, but it pays dividends to name your layers and know what these different things might be. So there's my breakfast, lunch, and dinner instances of that. And what we might do is do another test. I like to sort of iterate on this and make sure that things work along the way. And I can see that this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The size of this is not quite the actual size. So I'm going to go to actual size, and we can see in that case, looks a little neater and I'm not getting a gap there. But there we go. The rollovers are still there for each of these elements, and that's what I wanted. I'll go ahead and come back to my demo now. The bottom of my sort of backdrop here seems like a little bit too far away. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up just a bit. It doesn't need to go that far down unless I had like an additional menu item. And we can make sure that this aligns with the content that's in here as well. I do want these things to kind of line up, so I might make sure that we're aligning the horizontal centers of these. And so I'm going to choose these other ones as well and make sure that everything is aligning. And I want that to kind of go underneath the alignment of recipes and sort of get that right in the right spot. So it's looking pretty close. I'm just going to go from there. Okay, I now basically have the design that I want for the drop menu, but I'm going to do this in a particular way. Right now, if I was to move this content up, let's say I selected the background and these elements, it's going to come on top, or we're going to see those things as they move up and down. And so really I want them to disappear when they move up. And so one way that I can do that is to take this background, and I might take a look at that in my layers here. It's quite a bit farther back than my breakfast, lunch, and dinner stuff, so I might actually move this to a better sort of location there, and I'm going to name it background. So it's part of this layer stack. What I'm going to do now is duplicate that background layer. So I could do a Control D to make a duplicate layer, and I've got two of the backgrounds. And the one underneath is going to be my mask layer, and it's going to become a mask for this other content. You'll see how that works if I go from the mask all the way through all of the pieces of this, and I actually turn this into a mask by going up here to say use as mask. Then this mask is masking out this other content. So what you'll see is that that content will only show when within the mask. And what I could do is I could take this other content and move it up, and it's as if it's disappearing now because it's not within the mask area. I'm going to undo that with Control Z and bring that back to its original spot here, but that's happening the way I want it to happen. And now I've got all the components that I need in order to create my interactive drop menu. So I'm going to select them all, and they go from recipes right here, the bar that's underneath that, which is sort of an indicator. I might even name it indicator, or like, you know, it's some kind of active state letting me know that I'm rolling over, that kind of thing. I'm going to select all of those elements as well as these backgrounds, all the text that's in there. So I do want to go from that mask group all the way down through here. And all of these elements are going to represent my new drop menu component. So I'm going to go ahead and create a component out of that. And I could name that component. I'll call it my drop menu. So now it's a component. And usually if I have these components, I'm going to go ahead and move them off my design, because you're not going to have your component within the design, but you can move them sort of off screen to sort of play with their functionality here. And what I'm going to do with this is make it interactive by having some variance to this particular component. So this is going to be one example of it sort of in the drop state, but I'm going to have a second version of it when it's not dropped down, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add a variant, and the variant really is going to be my sort of dropped state. I might even just name that over here like dropped. That's the drop part of the menu. The original is going to be sort of the normal state of the menu. So I'm going to name that first one normal. And in the normal state, I'm not going to have all of these elements. So this right here might be, for example, faded out or a different color. So I could take that and say that I wanted it to be sort of transparent there, where it's not going to show up. I'm going to take these elements that are behind the mask as well and move them up. So all of these sort of pieces that are behind that mask are now going to sort of move up, and when they go up, they're not going to be revealed anymore. So as soon as we bring these sort of out of view, the original state of recipes is going to look just like this. Okay, so I've got two different elements within that component structure now. What it looks like normally, and then what it looks like when you roll over and reveal that drop menu. Now I'm ready to wire up the interactivity of this. And so I'm going to go into my prototype mode, and I'm going to select here within my normal state. What I want to do is when I actually roll over the word recipes, not like any part of it, but the word recipes specifically. So I'm going to go into that, and I'm going to say that I want an interaction on that. So when I actually sort of roll over that, I'm going to change to this other state. So once I'm sort of on that, and I'm going to be sort of right on the text part of that. So not the component part, but right here on the text of that. If I'm rolling over that piece of text, what I'm going to do is add an interaction to that. And I want it to be a mouse interaction. And what I want to do for this is have that change the state here of that component to the drop state. I want that to smart animate so that it actually drops down, and I'm going to make that go at 400 milliseconds. And I could add in different sort of easing, and I'll do an ease in and out option for that. All right. So there we go. I've got this where it can drop down to actually reveal this other part of the menu. Now the menu items aren't really doing much yet, but hopefully this part will work. So let's go ahead and test that. And I want to test that by bringing a asset of my drop menu back into my design. So I'll go ahead and place that onto the screen where it was supposed to sort of fit and readjust kind of where it goes. And we can then preview that to see if that drop menu actually occurs. So when I roll over this, we're going to actually see the drop menu. And I want that to be actual size so I can kind of see that effect. Now, once I've dropped down, it doesn't go away at that point because I never told it to go away. I only set on mouse over for it to drop down. So we do need to have another effect on this. I'm going to go ahead and come back to my menu here and go into the prototype for that. And I'm going to say for this, I'm going to add an interaction for really this entire state here that says that when I mouse leave that state, I want to then return back, and I'm going to have this sort of change to my normal state at that point. And so once I'm done interacting with these things, it will change back. And so I can see how that might work by going back over here to my design and taking a look by previewing it and seeing if that interaction actually works now. I do want the option of this to be at 100% so I can really see it. So I'll roll over to reveal my menu, and I can be on the menu. While I'm on the menu, it doesn't go away, but when I roll off and mouse leave, it's going to pop back. And it pops back because I didn't tell it to smart animate back. So I can see that I made one little error in the way I wired it up. I'll go back over to my interaction here on mouse leave, and I'll click on that and see that the change back was instantaneous, and I do want that to smart animate its way back. I like it to be a little snappier on the way back up than on the way back down, and so I'm going to make that one 300 milliseconds, whereas on the way down it was 400, so it was a little slower coming down. So a little snappier on the way back up. And then the other thing I think I'd like to do with this is have like a little bit of a hover delay. You'll see what I mean by that. Like, I'm going to go ahead and preview this again. There's one thing potentially that might bother me about it. So let's see what this wireframe looks like now. Let me preview it one more time and relaunch it. and I do want it at 100%. So when I roll over this, we get the menu. It could work a little faster there. It seems a little slow to me, but it's not too bad, and I roll over it. But the one thing that can be a little bit annoying is if you're working with the site and you roll over buttons really quick. See what happens there, where I roll over it and like pops down, like, and I get some weird behavior if my mouse is moving fast. It kind of does this weird pop down thing, just because I cued it, and so it's you know, I have nothing. If I waited just a little, like a half a second before actually dropping it down, making sure the user actually settles their mouse on there, that might be a little bit better. So it's a kind of hover delay before the actual menu actually drops down. Like you have to settle on it for a second. So if you were just navigating across your menu and just moving your mouse, it doesn't just have this weird flash like that. That part's a little annoying. And I could achieve that by going back into my drop menu component here. I'm going to move over to see that, and I can see the interactions that I have on here. So I'm going to sort of click in here where I've got this mouse inner interaction that I have, and I want to get right into that and take a look at that. And on that mouse inner, I could add a delay. And so this doesn't have to be a long delay. It might just be like 50 milliseconds as an example, which would be 1/20th of a second. And if I add 50 milliseconds as a delay and we go back to our prototype, now when I roll over that, it shouldn't give that weird behavior. So if I present this now and we like flash over the recipes, it's not just triggering. I have to actually roll over it for a second for it to trigger. I do want to see this at actual size. And so now if I go quickly over it, nothing. And that's exactly what I want. I don't want that just flashing and popping down. The behavior I want is to have a little bit of that hover delay before it actually animates down. And so that's working pretty nicely. All of my rollovers are now working. And I could still wire these up, these rollovers, to go to subsequent frames, where they're supposed to navigate to. Let's explore that very quickly. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my screen here, my design screen. And let's say I had multiple screens. Right now I only have a single sort of design layout here. I'm going to go back to my design and move this up. But let's say I duplicated out this desktop and I've got a couple other versions of this. So I'm going to have another version here that's going to represent sort of the breakfast version. And I'm simply going to change this text there to say breakfast instead, so that I know that I'm in the right spot. So that one will say breakfast, and I can't help but want to align it and redesign that part. And then I'll duplicate this and have another one that's called lunch. I'll just put that over here. And so then I'll call this one lunch, just as an example where we'd have other screens here. And then I could readjust where that one is. Okay, so I've got some other variations of this that might be other screens that I'm going to, and I want to make sure that my menu links to those places. So I'm going to zoom back in on my menu a little bit, and what we can do is then go into the prototyping mode, and I'm going to dial in to the text that's here, and I want to see my layers. And this is one of the things that's important, because I had I already have kind of a hover interaction on this. I actually want to deal with the text that's within it. So if I go to the component right here, I want to select the text that's in the component, and that's that type layer. And I'm going to add the interaction on that to go to the frame. So what we'll do is we'll hit the plus to add an interaction. I do want it to be on click. You have to click on that in order to go. And what I'll do is have that navigate to, in this case, the breakfast frame. And so did I not rename these other ones? I think I've got them both named breakfast, and that's a mistake. I need one of them to be named lunch so that I know which one's which. So there we go. Back into this. I want to make sure that I get the right thing. So I'm going to dial into my breakfast, and I want to make sure I select the text part of that. I'll go into the interaction that I was designing and make sure that that navigates to the breakfast page. I'm going to go ahead and have that just dissolve as an animation, and we'll just switch to the breakfast page and we'll have that dissolve. All right, now I'll go to the lunch one, do the same basic thing where I'll choose lunch, but I want to make sure I'm inside of that on the text. Click on the interaction, on click. I'm going to navigate to, and in this case, want it to go to the lunch version. I'm going to have it dissolve to that other frame. Okay, so now we've got this wired up where the different elements inside my drop menu should work. And I could go over to my desktop frame, test this out to make sure all is well, and go to the actual size here, roll over the recipes, get a little of that hover delay so it doesn't trigger, roll over, be able to choose. You'll see I'm getting that pointer hand now on these two. I didn't wire up dinner, but if I click on one of these, I should be able to go to that particular frame. Sure enough, that one goes to lunch. And if I roll over it, I'm using the same component within the lunch frame, so it should still work. And I can click on this one and that will take me to breakfast. And so there we go. We've got an interactive drop menu that's fully prototyped inside of Figma. I hope you enjoyed the ride getting there. There's a few steps involved in all of that, but this is not the only way that we can actually create a drop menu in Figma, but it is one of the ways, and one of the things I like about this particular workflow is working with a mask where I can animate these elements up and down behind that mask and just reveal them. They're basically still there, but they're kind of hidden up here under where we won't interact with them or anything. They're hidden behind that mask. So this is pretty flexible, and one of the ways you might create a drop menu in Figma.